Okay, welcome to this meeting of Caerphilly Council's Policy and Resources Scrutiny Committee, held on Thursday, the 20th of January 2022 via Microsoft Teams. This meeting will be recorded and made available to view via our council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images, audio of those individuals speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the council's website at caerphilly.gov.uk. So let's move on to our agenda. And item 1 on our agenda is to receive apologies for absence. Mark, do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Taylor, and also Councillor Mann sends his apologies. He is hoping to attend this meeting, but he said because of another meeting he'll be running a bit late.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Does colleagues know of any other apologies, please? No. Okay, on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their responsibility to declare any personal and/or prejudicial interests in respect of any business on this agenda, in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution, and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Are there any declarations of interest, please, members or officers? Okay, there are none. Thank you. Item 3 on our agenda is the minutes of the Policy and Resources Scrutiny Committee meeting held on 9th November 2021, and there are 5 pages to go through. I'll go through each page in turn. If members want to raise any issues, please say. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and page 5. Okay, do we have a mover for the minutes, please?
Yes, Chair, Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Is that seconded, please?
I'll second that.
Is that Councillor Seralis?
Yeah, Councillor Morgan.
Oh, Councillor Morgan. Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Moved and seconded. Thank you for that. Item 4. Oh, we don't need to go to a vote. Do we need to go to a vote? Sorry, Mark.
Yes, we do, Chair.
We'll yes, sorry about that, please. Let's have the forms. Yes, there's the forms now. Please vote, colleagues. Is there any member unable to vote, please?
I abstained on that, Chair, Councillor Seralis. I wasn't present at the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Seralis.
That's been carried, Chair. 8 votes for, 1 abstention and no votes against.
Thank you, Mark. On to item 4, consideration of any matter referred to this committee in accordance with the call-in procedure. Has any matter been called in, please?
No matters have been called in, Chair, for this meeting.
Thank you. Then we move on. Item 5, Policy and Resources Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme. Mark, could you take us through this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So members are asked to consider the Forward Work Programme alongside the Cabinet Work Programme as appended to the report, and to suggest any changes to the programme for the committee. The next meeting is on the 22nd of February. At that meeting, it's a busy meeting. We've got the Corporate Services Directorate Performance Report, the 6-month update, Whole Authority Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for period 9, the Strategic Equality Plan Annual Report, and also an update on the reserves. That's at the next meeting next month. So if members are happy, I'd like to seek approval to publish the Policy and Resources Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme as appended to the report onto the Council's website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any questions or points to raise on the Forward Work Programme, please? Then can we have a mover for Mark's proposal?
I'll move, Chair. Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Is that seconded, please?
Seconded, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. could we vote on this, please, then? Thank you. Form's up. Any members having a problem voting?
That's been carried unanimously. Chair, 9 votes for, no votes against, no abstentions.
Thank you, Mark. That's carried. Then on to item 6, to receive and consider the following 6 cabinet reports as listed on our agenda. Have any of these been brought forward, please, Mark?
No, Chair. None of the reports have been brought forward.
Thank you. We don't need to consider those further. On to item 7, 2021-22 Capital Expenditure Monitoring Report, period 7, which I understand is going to be introduced by Councillor Stenner.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to inform Scrutiny of the projected capital expenditure for the 2021-22 financial year. Included in the report are actual details and projected capital expenditure based on the information available as at month 7. The recommendation is shown at 3.1 of the report, and members are asked to note the content of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stenner. Members, any questions to raise on this report, please? Councillor Miles.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of queries on page 21, which is the list of items that have got some slippage against them. I was interested to note that there's 769,000 held against T Dufferin waste transfer station, which is now not going ahead. But that it says that money is now being held in order to find it. Well, I'm paraphrasing this, but it's like so that they can find something else to spend it on, is my interpretation of it. And I wondered why that, I don't know if anyone can answer this, but why that money is kind of being held under the heading of slippage when in fact the scheme is not going ahead for the waste transfer station and the money seems to be unallocated to anything else. So I'm not sure if anyone can answer that. And then further down the list, there are 2 other items. One is 833,000, which is held against the demolition of Pontfraith School in case that does go ahead. And then the very next bullet point is 4.6 million, which is earmarked for a new respite facility. And I just wondered, are we expecting those 2 things to be delivered in the next financial year if they're not going to be delivered this year? I'm thinking about, like, why are we earmarking funds unless there is a realistic prospect of them actually being delivered in the foreseeable future?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. I see Steve Harris has put his camera on, so I'm hoping he'll be able to respond to your queries. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll certainly do my best, Chair. I'll give you my view of the world, and if everybody else wants to come in, that's fine. But picking the first one up, T Dufferin, that money was set aside a number of years ago. The reason it's not being released from the slippage at the moment is because we will be developing a waste strategy moving forward. That's probably going to be put to members at some point later on this year. And that new strategy may well have some proposals for some capital investment related to that waste strategy. So for now, the money will be held and carried forward, and obviously members will be cited on those proposals in due course. In terms of the demolition of the school, yes, we're still holding that money because in time, obviously, that demolition will take place. So it's appropriate that we protect that money, carry it forward for when it's actually required. And likewise with the Respite Centre, agreement has been given to progress that project. It won't happen in the current year, obviously, but in due course, that project will be delivered and the funding will therefore be carried forward to ensure it can be funded at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Steve.
Can I just come back on?
Oh yes, go on.
Back on those, because Yeah, you know, what you were saying about the T-Dufferin project, I understand what you're saying about there'll be a new strategy, but you don't know how much money would be allocated to that new strategy, presumably. So I don't fully see the justification for holding exactly 769,000 in preparation for that new strategy. It feels like, you know, new projects should have new funding and the appropriate levels of funding, rather than carrying forward some old money that just didn't get used up. Do you know where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, I got a sense of what you're saying, but ultimately, if we don't carry it forward against that particular description at the moment, it'll just come back into corporate balances anyway.
Yeah, and
but
that's
at the
kind of my
moment,
point. You know, what
but
point
at the
do
moment,
things come back into balances?
Sorry, Brendan. Let Steve answer and then.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, at the point that you know, the relevant service area or head of service or director indicate that money will not be required for the purposes of for waste, essentially, then we would look to claw that money back into the centre, and we do that. Discussions do take place with service areas regularly, and where, you know, projects are not going to progress, then the money is clawed back into the corporate centre. Yeah,
and that was kind of my point. That's what I wanted to be assured about, really, is that we do bring back money into the central pot,
yes,
as and when it's available. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Whittle, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I better ask a question. It looks as though I'm the only opposition member here tonight, if I'm reading these little red dots correctly. It's 4 very quick questions on page 20, just like Councillor Miles. They may even be just one-word answers. The first one is in the economy and environment infrastructure. There's 477 7 figure. When it says basic strategic highway, that's not one particular highway, I'm assuming, is it?
Anyone, please?
Yeah, what that is, Councillor Whittle, that's section 106 monies that have yet to be allocated, so it's not for one scheme. That is the balance that is available for allocation moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We can do this quite quickly, I think. Well done, Steve. The next one is the corporate maintenance of tips, mines and spoils. That's quite a large figure there. Are there any dangerous tips to our knowledge in the borough? And I see that Vochrew has been identified. There are a number of tips all around the borough. I can't remember how many now. I've got a figure of 17 in my mind, but I may be wrong on that. But you know, can we have a list provided to councillors on which is really urgent, which tip is really urgent, and which is considered to be quite safe? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's outside of my remit, obviously, in terms of expertise.
Yeah, yes,
but
of course.
Clearly, you're right, Councillor Whittle. The money that is available will be prioritised to the areas of greatest need. But yes, sure, we can approach Marcus Lloyd and ask for that information to be pulled together for you.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Whittle.
Yeah, thank you. I think all councillors will probably appreciate that information, in particular those councillors who've got tips in their area, of course. Another one is the Penatha House, which is T Penatha car park extension. I'm wondering why we need an extension at the moment, but my guess is that's going to be carried forward for some time, because it's certainly we haven't had many cars there for the last 2 years. I think 30 was the maximum I counted once. But...
Okay, I can respond on that. When we did set aside money a number of years ago to make improvements in the car park, those improvements have now been made. If you recall, there's a one-way system now in the car park, etc., etc. That balance, I think it's 130. I haven't got it in front of me from memory. Yes, I think it's 130.
That's correct.
110,000 of that is now actually going to be redirected to the Lawns project, and Cabinet have recently given approval for that. So the only balance on there will now be 20k. And going back to Councillor Miles's point, I'll be pulling that into the corporate centre at the end of the year.
Oh, okay, thank you. And finally, the last one, forgive me, I may have missed it. I've obviously missed it. The new Respite facility for social services. Where exactly is that to be built, please?
in Pontefraith, on the Pontefraith Comprehensive Site.
On the comprehensive. Oh, all right. I thought it. Okay, right. Lovely. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Riddle.
I've done my bit on behalf of all the opposition councillors, wherever they are. I hope they're not down the pub.
You did it very comprehensively. Thank you, Councillor Riddle. Councillor Morgan, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's obviously quite considerable slippage there, and obviously very good reasons for having that kind of slippage. I'm just wondering if, you know, with 16 million of slippage in the housing revenue account and 27 million slippage in the place shaping plans, is there any consideration being given to perhaps introduce more staff to turbocharge the slippage and bring it back up to date, bring us back on, you know, over the next year or two, bring it back on stream?
Thank you. Steve, would you like to try?
I can offer some comments on that. I mean, with the HRA, as you know, we've now delivered the WHQS, so that's a good news story. Now we're moving on to the next phase, you know, which will involve new builds, etc., etc. So, you know, I'm sure that the new head of housing will be considering his staffing requirements to deliver all that moving forward. But again, you know, I know that my colleague Leslie Allen is working with the new head of housing and developing a revised business plan now for the HRA, which you'll see in due course. In terms of place shaping, this is all relatively new. As you know, the report setting out the place shaping and wellbeing framework was presented to members last year. We set aside over £30 million. We've released just over 4.7 million of that now for 21st century schools. And these plans will now evolve over time. But of course, it's not a short-term plan. This is a medium to longer term plans. But year on year, you will see that balance in the place shaping agenda start to reduce as various projects come on stream and the funding is released.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Any other member have any other points? Councillor Miles, please.
Yeah, it's kind of following on from Councillor Morgan's question there, because I was looking at it from a slightly different point of view, where if we've got an awful lot of slippage this year, I wondered what impact that would have on future budgets, because if you get into a sort of like a backlog situation where projects haven't been delivered, there's surely a limit to how much you can deliver in any given year. So I wondered, with all this slippage that we've got, whether new money, new projects for next year are going to be held back because we've got all these old projects that we've still got to deliver on. So is the new money, the new budgets for next year, likely to be reduced as a result of this slippage?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, with the capital programme, there's always slippage, because clearly, you know, capital projects is quite a large lead-in time in many cases. We have to secure funding from external bodies such as the Welsh Government, etc. So really, when you just look at it in isolation for one financial year, it's not that helpful, because it does look as though we're not delivering. But in effect, you know, we need to look at this over a medium to longer term time frame. So my colleague Rhian Williams is on the call with me today, and we've already had conversations about presenting these reports in future, giving you a 3-year view of where we are. So you may see a figure of 76 million for slippage, but if we present this in a slightly different way, you can see then when that money is going to be spent over the next 2 to 3 years, and that might give you more reassurance of what the plans are in terms of delivering those projects. So the next time you see this report, I will have worked on it with my colleague Rhian, and we'll try and set it out in a way perhaps that's more meaningful and gives you some sort of comfort that these projects are going to be delivered over the medium to longer term time scale.
Thank you, Steve. Brenda, is that okay?
That's great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, that is some assurance there. Thank you very much for that, Steve. Any other member have any other point to raise on this item, please? Okay, members are asked to note the contents of this report, so it's duly noted. Thank you for that, Steve. On to item 8, which is Treasury Management Annual Strategy, Capital Finance Prudential Indicators, and Minimum Revenue Provision Policy for 2022-23. And we'll go back, please, to Cabinet Member Councillor Stenner.
Thank you, Chair. The report is submitted to scrutiny for consideration prior to its presentation to Council on the 24th of February 2022. The Authority's annual strategy Treasury management. The report shows a data set of prudential indicators relevant to Treasury management and capital finance. The report also cross-referenced to the reports for the Corporate Director of Education and Corporate Services on revenue and capital budgets. Scrutiny's consideration is sought prior to its presentation to Council. The minimum revenue provision policy to be adopted by the Authority for 2022-23. The revised Code of Practice for Treasury Management in the Public Services provides that an annual strategy be submitted to members on or before the start of the financial year to outline the activities planned within the parameters of the Treasury Management Policy Statement and the Treasury Management Practices. The Local Government Act also requires the Authority to set out this Treasury Management Strategy for borrowing for the forthcoming year to prepare an annual investment strategy which sets out the policies for managing its investments, giving priority to the security and liquidity of these investments. The recommendations are shown at 3.1 to 3.18 of the report, and the reason for the recommendations of the annual strategy report is a requirement of the SIPFA Code of Practice for Treasury Management in the Public Services. The investment strategy is a requirement of the Local Government Act 2003 and to comply with legislative framework and requirements as indicated in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.5 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stenner. Members are asked to consider and comment on the report. Do any members have any comments, please? Or questions? Councillor Miles, please.
Thank you. The question's around page 28, and it's to do with external and internal borrowing. I read a sentence there and I wasn't sure if this was a fundamental change of policy or just a continuation of an old policy. It says, the Authority, having adopted the policy of internal borrowing from the latter half of 2008 to 2009, has an internal borrowing position of 72 million, blah, blah, blah. Unless the policy is prudent, the Authority will no longer adopt the policy of internal borrowing. So that felt fairly fundamental to me, but I wasn't sure. So I was wondering if somebody can sort of elaborate a little bit on that point. Are we having a big change of policy here or not?
Thank you. Steve, would you like to try and answer to that, please?
Yeah, it's not a fundamental change of policy. I mean, the reason we do internal borrowing is that currently, and for a number of years actually, the cost of borrowing is actually higher than the returns that we can get on our investments. So therefore, it's more financially beneficial to us as a council to use any cash balances we have available to fund our capital programme instead of borrowing. Now, we'll do that as long as it's feasible, but once it's no longer feasible, we'll just stop. That's all that statement really means. But all of this internal borrowing, at some point in the future, we'll need to replenish those funds. But for now, the current financial environment in which we find ourselves, internal borrowing is more financially beneficial to the council than to actually take the loans out at this time.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Councillor Miles, you can end with that.
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds like it could happen in the future, but it's not necessarily going to be an immediate change. Yeah, that's fine for me. Thank you.
Thank you both. Next, Councillor Adams, please.
Thanks, Chair. Steve, this is one for you to put your finger in the air and look for the wind and go forward. And it's 5.2, page 27, the interest rate prospects long term. I did mention it in the pre-meeting. Of course, we're well aware of the way that inflation is going right across the board for all things. And because the council has to pay its bills, the ones that go up, just the same as all of us and all of our residents. And of course, we're expecting that there will be Bank of England rate increases going forward. But of course, that might begin to have a small effect on our interest rate attachments that we can look for throughout the next year with our money to see how we can begin to catch up, keep up, or whatever with our new bills that we'll be facing. And always, of course, as inflation goes up, the rates will go up, but there's always a big lag, isn't there, in what those of us chasing as much money as we can get hold of, and that will affect the council as well, with all of our millions that we are putting in. So do you expect us to be lagging behind for that long, that the 0.69 that is indicated in the appendices might get up well beyond 0.1% or 1% rather? There we are. Colin is back with us now, thankfully, and we discussed this at the pre-meeting. What can we hope for, and what beneficial effect it might have on the bills that the council has to pay?
Thank you, Councillor Adams. We'll ask Steve to respond, and I think Councillor Mann may want to come in after that. Steve, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information there, isn't there? But it is a bit like crystal ball gazing at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, we know we're suffering economic shocks at the moment from COVID, from Brexit, etc., etc. I mean, the thinking with our Treasury advisors at the moment is, yes, we will see an upward trend in interest rates, but I don't expect that to be a sharp increase. It will probably be a moderate increase over time. We know as well that we're seeing sharp increases in inflation at the moment. Many of you probably saw in the press yesterday that the 12-month rate to December last year is actually now at 5.4%. That's the highest rate for a considerable period of time. But again, there is expectation that a lot of this may be short-term. We may see this start to come down, hopefully, as we progress through the next year. But, you know, in terms of where this leaves the council, there's a few things. Yes, sharp price increases impact on budgets. In the draft budget proposals, we have factored in 4% for non-pay inflation, which, you know, puts significant pressures on our budgets. Likewise, if interest rates do increase, well, we may then see better returns on our investments. But at the same time, the cost of borrowing will be higher. So all of these things have to be balanced on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, we really are in challenging times at the moment because of, as I said, all the shocks of the fallout of the pandemic, Brexit, etc., etc.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Morgan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Steve, much of the report obviously is looking at the sort of macroeconomic situation that we find ourselves in. I'm just astounded that we still take guidance from such as Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch when they were found to be woefully inadequate in 2008. In fact, their AAA ratings on products can, in many ways, be the finger can be pointed at them for AAA rating stuff which are known as junk, and yet we still use those same rating agencies. And I just wondered if there was anyone else, where else we could go to perhaps get information. And the Bank of England, you know, they've had historically low rates since 2008. They've constantly indicated that they will rise those rates. They did for a short while in 2015, and there was a kickback in the market, so they pulled it back again. And now they're indicating that there's going to be rate rises again. All the while, obviously, inflation is at 5.1 in Britain. It's over 7% at the moment in America, and our markets are related. But to the man in the street, I would say that inflation is probably running at, with food and petrol and heating, inflation is probably running at 15 or 20%. But ultimately, we are taking guidance from the Bank of England and from those people, and yet they've shown year in, year out to be quite wrong in their forecasts. I just wonder if there's somewhere else we could go. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Steve.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, there's only a certain number of organisations out there who give us these ratings. But just to reassure you, we don't only look at them and make decisions based on it. We do consult our Treasury advisors regularly as well. If we're planning, for example, on making an investment, say into pooled funds, etc., we will discuss that with Arlene Close. Obviously, they've got expertise in those areas. And sometimes we'll also get them to do due diligence work for us. We'll commission a piece of work, you know, if we're looking at a fairly significant investment. So whilst those agencies are there as a guide and the credit ratings are there as a guide, we do work very closely with our advisors as well if we're considering making investments.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else wish to raise a question, please? No?
So, sorry, Chair, I'm...
Go ahead, Colin.
As you know, I came late for reasons I've already explained.
Indeed, yes.
And the governance hasn't actually finished, but there we are. I assume you've... I just caught the end of Mike's, Councillor Adams' question. I assume that was about the forecast returns. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, it was. But yeah, please feel free to ask something, and Steve, I'm sure, will be able to answer. So please ask anything you'd like. Yeah,
I mean, how confident are you, Steve, that we can actually achieve the sort of numbers that are in there?
Thank you.
I know it's not an exact science.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our investment returns, we are starting to now see an improved position. Just to give you an example, for the 2021 financial year, we did secure returns of around £786,000 on our investments, which was 0.33%, and that, you know, compared to the Welsh average, was a good performance. We've now made some of the longer-term pooled fund investments in the last year or so, and we are now expecting our returns for the current financial year to actually be around 1.1 million. So, you know, we're seeing over £300,000 extra income coming in from some of the changes we've made this year. And again, in terms of the average, that's 0.57% return, you know, which again places us very well when you compare that with other Welsh local authorities. So we're making good progress, and we're always looking at other opportunities. And again, Rhian, my colleague, she's often sending me suggestions based on work that she does. And we are, you know, wherever we can, we are now starting to make quite a lot of new investments.
Thank you, Steve.
In fact, I think Rhian would like to come in, Chair, if that's okay.
She did show her, yes, there she is. Rhian, please come in.
I think Steve might have answered some of the questions already, but with regard to Arlene Close, they provide us on a daily basis updates with regard to any of the investors we are considering borrowing, you know, lending money to. So anyone, they would say, you know, irrespective of what their credit ratings are, if they said do not invest in this company at the moment, you know, immediately, irrespective of what falls in our TM strategy, we wouldn't invest in them. So they, you know, they're experts in the field and they give us daily updates on any investments we should make.
Thank you for that input, Rhian.
So,
anyone else like to come in? Oh, sorry,
just to come back for a moment, and I do sympathise with the point that Councillor Morgan made earlier, that it seems we're stuck with certain almost monopoly providers, and it's a bit like when we used to rely on Capita for advice before we went to Arlene Close. I mean, you know, they were proved to be not particularly useful, but they appeared to be the only people in the market at the time. But so we are looking to actively raise that sort of you know, the return that we're going to see. That's the summary of it, yeah.
Yeah, we are, and as I said, the figures I just quoted you can see that we are now generating more investment income.
Yeah, I'm not worried about particularly comparing with other Welsh authorities. I mean, it's great if we're better, but it is what's coming into this pot that is the crunch, isn't it? Can I ask another one, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Nobody else, unless you've got somebody else coming in.
No, you're next.
No, I was looking at 3.1.6. Where the authority is looking to borrow 42 million. Now, again, I think Steve will probably tell us only if we have to. But, you know, bearing in mind the sort of reserves that we've actually got, do we actually need to borrow that sort of money?
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Mann. We did cover this earlier before we were able to join us.
Sorry, I didn't realise, obviously.
No, it's fine. I mean, you know, I've talked to you about this on numerous occasions before about the concept of internal borrowing.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we are using internal borrowing. We're not going out there and drawing loans down, but we need to cover it off in the strategy. We need to get permission to borrow in the future when we need to. So that's why that's in the report. We won't borrow that money next year. I can tell you that now because we have sufficient money available in our reserves at the present time. But there will come a time when we have to call on those reserves. We will have to replenish those funds and we will have to then borrow at that stage. But at the moment, as I explained to the other members earlier, it's more financially prudent for us to use internal borrowing.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And apologies for going back on something you've done, Chair. But so that's your insurance policy, Steve.
Well, no, it's just prudent financial management.
Yeah.
Good answer, Steve. Thank you for that. Anyone else, please, like to come in before we go to a vote on the recommendations? No one's showing? Okay. The recommendations are paragraphs, as Councillor Stenner had said, paragraphs 3.1.1 to 3.1.8 on page 26 of our pack. Can we have the vote up, please, Mark?
Do you need to get a member to move and second, first of all, Chair?
You're absolutely right. Thank you for that. Do we have a mover first, please?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you. Who's
Second.
that? Councillor Morgan and Councillor
Adams.
Adams.
Second.
Thank you ever so much. Moved and seconded. Please go to the vote now, colleagues. Any members having problems voting?
That's been carried unanimously, Chair. 9 votes for, no votes against and no abstentions.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, colleagues, for that. And thank you, Steve and Rian, for your advice. On to the final item on our agenda this evening, which is Capital Strategy Report 2022 to 2023.
Sorry, Chair. I was trying to, and I realised I muted. The vote didn't show up on here. I've had various things done to the machine today, so I don't think it's working very well. But,
can we take your vote then, please, Councillor Mann?
I'm happy to vote in favour, but I don't know whether Mark has got me in on some other sort of screen or something. But
thank you, Councillor Mann.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, that's noted. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Mann.
Item 9 then, Capital Strategy Report 2022-2023, and it's to be introduced by Cabinet Member Councillor Stenner, please.
Thank you once again, Chair. The report is submitted to scrutiny this evening prior to its presentation to Council on the 24th of February 2022. The Authority's Capital Strategy Report for 2022-23 financial year in accordance with the Prudential Code that was introduced by the Local Government Act 2003. The report cross-references to the report by the Corporate Director of Education and Corporate Services on revenue and capital budgets and the Treasury Management Annual Strategy, Capital Finance, Prudential Indicators and Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Report for 2022-23. The Capital Strategy outlines the principles and framework at the very high level that shape the Authority's capital investment proposals. The principal aim is to deliver an affordable programme of capital consistent with the financial strategy that contributes to the achievement of the Council's priorities and objectives as set out in the Authority's corporate plan. Consider associate risks, recognise financial constraints over the longer term and represent value for money. The strategy defines at the highest level how the capital programme decision making identifies the issues and options that influence capital spending and sets out how the resources and capital programmes will be managed. In addition, the capital strategy should comply with the Prudential Code for local authority capital investment introduced through the Local Government Act 2003. The key objectives of the Code are to ensure that the capital investment plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable. The capital strategy sets out the framework for capital investment decisions. The strategy for funding this investment is underpinned by the Prudential Code for Local Authority Investment, which was introduced by the Local Government Act 2003. The Prudential Code has the following key objectives: that capital investment plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable. The Treasury management decisions are taken in accordance with good professional practice, and that local strategic planning, asset management and proper option appraisals are supported. The recommendations are shown as 3.1 of the report, and the reason for recommendation are the annual capital strategy report is a requirement of the SIPTA's Prudential Code. Authorities are required by regulation to have regard to the Prudential Code when carrying out their duties in England and Wales under Part 1 of the Local Government Act 2003. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stenner. Over to members, please. Any questions or queries?
Please, Chair, if nobody else is coming in.
Yes, please, Councillor Mann.
There is a couple of paragraphs there on commercial activities. I wonder if I could ask the Cabinet member if the Cabinet has any particular stance on commercial activities by the authority.
OK, by all means, Councillor Stenner, would you like to respond, please?
Yeah, we are looking at commercial activities, and obviously we've got a group set up looking at this commercial activities within the authority. Obviously, they have to be ethical. We wouldn't be endorsing, say, a tobacco brand on the side of a building anywhere. So
not in Uchtegra anyway.
No, definitely not. So this is actually, you know, a work in progress. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Stenner. Councillor Mann, do you have any want to come back?
No, I think Councillor Adams wants to come in, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Adams, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was on that very point that we've just been speaking about, commercial activities, and I've had a recent request from a resident who obviously has a log burner and is asking that when the authority cuts down the trees that it has to sometimes, is it possible that we can be selling off some of that cut down wood for the purposes of our residents? Now, I haven't actually replied, but I have asked the question of our Parks Department. Haven't had an answer yet, but
perhaps we can ask Steve Harris to come in.
Yeah, COP26 wouldn't want us to be burning our trees, then we want to be.
It's a very good point.
I've
got a couple of logs in my garden.
There we go. Thanks,
Steve, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have an answer about the logs. I'll leave that to the relevant department. But I just wanted to come in to make a wider point, really. And that is that SIPFA have revised their codes of practice around treasury management and capital investments. You've probably seen in the press there have been some concerns that some councils have gone a little bit too far with this. Yeah. You know, investing in major retail parks, etc., etc. So basically now there are some changes in the codes of practice, and also in whether the PWLB will give us loans for certain purposes. And where something is seen as just investing purely for yield, we cannot borrow off the PWLB anymore. Okay, so they are tightening this up. But you know, if we could say, for example, we were going to invest in a solar farm, even though we may get a good return from that, there's also wider benefits in terms of the decarbonisation agenda, etc. So those loans would still probably be granted by the PWLB. But I just wanted to say it's an area that's come under quite a lot of scrutiny, and some of the rules and regulations around this have now been tightened up.
Good, thank you for that information, Steve.
Chair, I think that's, if I could just come in for a moment, I think that's welcome, because I think there are some very small district councils who've got massive investments in things like shopping parks and that, which are not as good news now as they used to be. And is it Warrington, one of the councils in the northwest of England, who's got something like 50 million in the gas company that just went through? So it can be a precarious life, can't it?
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Morgan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for the Cabinet member. I know Steve mentioned the solar farm there, but there are a number of projects that the Regen Committee are looking at. And I know that discussion has taken place. There are, as Steve has mentioned, I know of one council that invested heavily in an airport, so heavily that when the pandemic hit and the airport had no planes running through there, that all of a sudden the council was in difficulty. Now I know the Regen board were looking at sort of smaller projects spread around the borough. And it seems a better way of not putting all your eggs in one basket. I'm just wondering if the strategy remains the same.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Morgan, it does.
That was a nice, straightforward answer. Thank you, Councillor Stenner. Okay, are you happy with that, Councillor Morgan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Any other member got any thoughts or questions, please? Yes, Councillor Mann. You're on mute at the moment.
It's a different paragraph, Chair. It's on the revenue budget implications, 5.7. The word sustainability arises in 5.7.3, and we're talking about, borrowing money over 50 years. Now, I know that's happening. I think sustainability is a bit of a strange description for that. But I was wondering how many loans have we actually got out for that sort of length of time? Because it's a lot longer than traditionally the council ever borrowed for, isn't it? And you end up paying huge amounts of interest, obviously, because of the length of time the loan is out there.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Steve, would you like to respond to that, please?
Offer a view on this as well, but typically our loans wouldn't be extended over that period of time, but we can set aside the revenue to fund our underlying capital need to borrow over that period if we want to, and that's what the minimum revenue provision is there to do. But in terms of the loans, we don't normally take them out over that extended period, but I'm quite happy for Rian to come in if she wants to put a bit more context on that.
Thank you. Rian, any thoughts? Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Mann, I would be able to send you a list of the maturity of our loans if you wished. I know that we haven't taken out any borrowing for a number of years, and certainly since I've taken over this role. I think one of our longest loans is due to expire in 2067, but there are short, most of them are shorter, but off the top of my head I can't tell you, but I could provide you with a list of the maturity of the loan analysis if you wished.
Okay, Rian. I think the way that's worded, it gave a hint that we did actually have 50-year loans out there, and I know there was some discussion, I know maybe 3 or 4 years back, on the merits or otherwise of taking money out over this period of time. I think I'm being told that we haven't actually done that up to now, which is good news as far as I'm concerned. But is that the case, Steve? Or Rian?
Yeah, I think if Rian gives you the maturity profile for the loans, that'll give you the information you're asking for. I think it's disclosed in the financial statements anyway, but yeah we can extract something and send it to you. Yeah,
there's nothing over 50 years at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Anyone else like to come in, please? No one else? Okay, we are asked to note the contents of this report at para 3.1 on page 60, and so the contents of the report are duly noted. And that's the final item on our agenda, so thanks to every member and officer for contributing this evening. I'm now declaring the meeting closed. Thank you, and we'll just wait for confirmation that recording's ended.